crime you two planned was indeed perfect. Only the victim is alive and the murderers are not. It's a pity you didn't know when you started your game of murder that I was playing too.
Hello and welcome to the morgue. Before we continue, I want to talk about what this podcast is about. In this podcast, we will be talking about all the horrific serial killers and murderers they have committed. Disclaimer: if you are uncomfortable listening about gruesome murders and crimes, do not listen. Today in the morgue, Ted Bundy. I'm guessing you all know about him, but if you don't, Theodore Robert Bundy, born on November 24th, 1946, who died on 24th January 1989, was an American serial killer, kidnapper, rapist, burglar, and a necrophile who assaulted and murdered numerous young women and girls during the 1970s and possibly earlier. Shortly before his execution, after more than a decade of denials, he confessed to 30 homicides committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. The true victim count remains unknown and could be much higher. That fact just proves how dangerous Ted Bundy was. Bundy was described by many of his young female victims as handsome and charismatic, traits that he exploited to win their trust. He typically approached them in public places, impersonating an authority or a public figure, before overpowering and assaulting them at more secluded locations. He sometimes revisited his secondary crime scenes for hours at a time, grooming and performing sexual acts with the decomposing corpse until pure putrefaction and destruction by wild animals made further interaction impossible. He decapitated at least 12 of his victims and kept some of the severed heads in his apartment for a period of time as mementos. On a few occasions, he simply broke into dwellings at night and bludgeoned his victims as they slept. Ted Bundy, who was initially incarcerated in Utah in 1975 for aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault, Bundy became a suspect in a progressively longer list of unsolved homicides in multiple states. Facing murder charges in Colorado, he engineered 2 dramatic escapes and committed further assaults, including 3 murders before his ultimate recapture in Florida in 1978. He received 3 death sentences in 2 separate trials for the Florida homicides. Bundy was executed at Florida State Prison near Stark, Florida. On January 24th, 1989, biographer Anne Rule described him as a sadistic sociopath who took pleasure from another human's pain and the control he had over his victims, to the point of death, and even after. He once called himself the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet. Attorney Paulie Nelson, member of his last defense team, agreed Ted, she wrote, was in the very definition of heartless evil. Now that we spoke about Ted Bundy's gruesome murders, let's speak about his childhood. Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24th, 1946, to Eleanor Louise Cowell, who was born on 1924 and died on 2012. Known for most of her life as Louise at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers, now known as the Lund Family Center, in Burlington, Vermont. His father's identity has never been determined with certainty. His birth certificate assigns paternity to a salesman and Air Force veteran named Lloyd Marshall. But Louise later claimed that she had been seduced by a sailor, whose name may have been Jack Worthington. Years later, investigators would find no record of anyone in that name in the Navy or the Merchant Marine archives. Some family members expressed suspicions that Bundy might have been fathered by Louise's own violent, abusive father, Samuel Cowell, but no material evidence has been found to support or refute this theory. In the next episode of The Morgue, we will discuss about Ted Bundy's first trial and some of his victims. Thank you for listening to The Morgue.